I'd like to talk about three really common mistakes that a lot of people make when they start the ketogenic diet. So, when interviewing people who are either plateaued or they're running into problems, these three things keep coming up over and over and over again. So, I'm going to make it really simple, and this is going to be a fairly quick video, but these are very important points. So, that way, if you're starting keto, you can be very successful. And the first mistake relates to fat. Okay. People sometimes think that a ketogenic diet is just a high fat diet, and that's what makes you burn fat and turn it into ketones. That's not true. It's not eating more fat. Eating more fat is not going to make you more into ketosis. It's the lowering of carbohydrates. Now, what is an average person trying to fix when they go on keto? They're trying to fix problems with their insulin. Okay. Primarily this thing called insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is basically the pre-stage before diabetes. It starts off mild, it gets worse, worse, and worse until the point where it becomes advanced insulin resistance, and then you become a pre-diabetic and a diabetic. So diabetes is advanced insulin resistance. Now let's just take a look at a really, like probably the most important function of insulin. Insulin prevents the loss of fat. It's a survival mechanism. Yes, it does help you store fat, but it prevents the burning of fat. It also prevents the loss of proteins in the body. Like if you think about a diabetic type 1, where they have no more insulin, and what happens with them? They're really skinny. But what's confusing to some people is that, wow, they're a diabetic, they should be fat. Now, a lot of times when you have type 1, you're very, very skinny. Why? Because you have no more insulin to store anything. So everything just tends to just end up in the blood. So you have high levels of fat in the blood that then don't get stored. You end up with high levels of sugar and you lose a lot of protein too. So it's a really nasty problem, diabetes type 1. So how does this relate to fat? In order for you to even develop diabetes in the first place, advanced insulin resistance, or even insulin resistance, there has to first be a problem in your fat cells, where your fat cells have insulin resistance. In other words, there's this dysfunctional fat cell that can no longer store fat. So, as a protective mechanism, the fat cell has to stop that fat from going in. So, it develops this resistance against insulin. So, we no longer have this storage mechanism in the fat cell. But now, where does that fat go? The fat is now going to be accumulated outside the fat cell. Okay, that's called ectopic fat. It's not in the adipocyte anymore. You're going to get fatty muscle. It's going to be in your liver. It's going to be around the organs. It's going to be inside the pancreas. It's going to be all over the place. That is when you start developing insulin resistance to a point where then it switches to diabetes. So let's just take a look at that one point for a second. If you're going to go on keto to fix insulin resistance, and you're a pre-diabetic or you're diabetic, would it make sense to really stuff yourself with more fat? That's going to contribute to the problem. So one of the biggest mistakes on keto is people just do unlimited fat. They do bulletproof coffee. They're downing tons of butter. They're doing keto fat bombs. I actually have a recipe channel that teaches you how to make these recipes, but I do think they serve one purpose is when you first start keto and you're making this transition and you want to make it easy and you eat more fat to be able to fast longer. Okay, that's a good reason. But after you've adapted and you're doing good, I don't recommend continuing to just dump unlimited amount of fat in your system. What you should do is consume the fat that normally comes with the protein. Don't go low fat. Don't avoid fat, but just don't consume a lot of extra fat, especially if you're trying to fix insulin resistance and diabetes. So when someone's like plateaued with their weight and I ask them what they're eating, and then I find out they're eating like all this extra fat, like I'll have them make that change and they'll do much better. On the flip side of that, there are certain programs like Ideal Protein that is protein, low carb, and low fat. But the problem is the quality of ingredients are really crappy. They're getting their protein from soy protein isolates and all that stuff. So that's not necessarily one of the mistakes. I just want to bring that up. You want to use healthy ingredients as well, like real food, which relates to the mistake number 2. I mean, this concept of keto snacks. goes completely against what we're trying to do, because insulin is not just increased by carbs, it's also increased by eating. And these snacks are going to really just raise your insulin. Especially if you're buying all these snacks, you're going to be eating them through the day. I mean, just go on Amazon and type keto snacks. There's just everything from keto ice cream, the so-called protein shakes, there's chips, there's cookies. It just goes on and on and on. And if you read the label on this, they're filled with things like polydextrose and dextrose and all these new fibers that haven't been tested, tapioca, corn fiber. And just because something says keto does not even make it keto. But the point is that you don't want to do these snacks. I can see using some of these as dessert occasionally, but I don't do a lot of these keto snacks. And that is a big reason why people are failing on keto, because they're doing all this keto snacks and the ingredients are not even keto, especially when you get into the Atkins type so-called keto friendly foods. And then you have Slim Fast. But if you see ingredients like maltitol, I mean, that's just like almost the same as sugar. And I have found just by cutting out the keto snacks that people do very well. Just eat real food. Don't make your meal a bar, like a keto bar, even if they're the correct macros, because it's just not real food. All right, number 3, hidden carbohydrates. Okay. And a big one is this maltodextrin. It's even in your supplements. It's in the electrolyte powders. I've done a video on that. And I think another big thing is too many berries and fruit. I've had people say, well, fruit has fructose. Fruit has half fructose and half glucose. So yes, fructose is low on the glycemic index, but your liver is the only organ that can handle fructose, and it is going to create a major problem with insulin resistance. So even though it's low on the glycemic index, it's still a big problem. And out of all the things that are very high in fructose, agave nectar is right at the top. And if you look at agave nectar in some products, it says, oh yeah, it's keto friendly because it's low in the glycemic index. Well, that's just like saying like pizza is good because it has tomatoes. Well, it has other things as well. Now, there's a really good Kindle book that I recently got. I didn't finish it, so I can't say that I agree with every single point yet, but it's called Don't Eat for the Winter. And what I like about it, it's written by an engineer. Okay. And so engineers are good problem solvers. They think logically. And this book is so far really interesting because the author mentions like an acorn. A squirrel would start to accumulate all these acorns, right? And they're going to eat those through the winter. Now, an acorn is like 53% fat, it's 41% carb, and it's like 6% protein. A very similar profile to junk food. And when you combine that much carb with that much fat, well, you're going to create a lot of storage of fat. And he also mentions another interesting point about, when do we harvest fruits? Okay, like apples, pears, peaches, all this fruit is mainly harvested in September, October, maybe early November. It's very unnatural to harvest fruit all year round. That fruit, which is higher in fructose, tends to act as a survival mechanism so you can survive through the winter. But of course, we have fruit available every single day of the year. So you can very easily overdo the fruit, especially if you add it with fat. Our body and our genes have not evolved to handle that much fructose. So to summarize, number 1, don't overdo it with the fat. Consume the fat that normally comes with protein. And also realize when you're drinking all this fat, it's not all being oxidized as fat burning. A lot of it can be stored as well. And as I'm thinking about this, there's actually a 4th one that I want to bring up. I mentioned this in another video. Now, typically, the ketogenic diet should be a moderate amount of protein, and it definitely should be bioavailable, complete protein. So if you're doing the ketogenic diet with plant-based protein or just not enough bioavailable protein, that's going to tell the brain to keep eating. So out of all the macronutrients, carbs, protein, fat, protein is the most valuable to the body because we don't store it. And there's so many different functions that are dependent on this protein. So this really relates to when you start doing more intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting. If you're deficient in amino acids, going into a prolonged fast, you're just not going to feel good. And so for some people that don't feel good, it wouldn't hurt to take a blend of complete amino acids just to fortify the body. Now, to get more information, and the healthy version of the ketogenic diet. I put that video up right here. Check it out.